Damien Ashgrove gripped the edge of the stone table until his knuckles turned white, and still the pain did not stop. It came from deep inside his chest, twisting like a blade that had no metal, no shape, nothing a sword could cut or a healer could remove. He had been the alpha king of the Ashgrove pack for 11 years, and for 9 of those years, this pain had followed him like a shadow that refused to leave. Tonight it was worse than usual. He sat alone in his private chamber. Candles burned low, his breath coming in short, sharp pulls. Outside his door, 2 guards stood in silence, trained never to enter unless called, because the king did not want anyone to see him like this. Weak, broken, a ruler who could command 100 wolves into battle, but could not command his own body to be still. He pressed a fist against his ribs and closed his eyes. The healers called it many things over the years: a curse, a block in his energy, a wound from his childhood that refused to heal from the inside. None of it had helped. None of it had even come close. A knock came at the door, soft and careful. "Enter," Damien said, forcing his voice to sound steady. His beta, a broad-shouldered man named Callum Whitfield, stepped inside and immediately understood what he was looking at. He had seen his king like this many times before, and each time it broke something in him to witness it. "The 24th healer arrived an hour ago," Callum said quietly. "She is ready to see you whenever you are ready." Damien let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it. 24, he repeated. "Do you know what that number means to me now, Callum? It means nothing. It is just another name on a very long list of people who could not help me. She comes highly recommended. From the northern packs. They say she can read pain like a map. They said that about the last one too." Damien rose slowly from his chair, pressing a hand to the wall to steady himself, as a fresh wave rolled through his chest. "And the one before her. And the one before her. Bring her in. Let us see if the map leads anywhere different this time." Callum left, and moments later returned, with a tall woman wrapped in gray robes, her eyes sharp and calculating, the kind of eyes that had spent decades studying bodies and spirits alike. She introduced herself as Healer Odessa Vane, and she began her examination without wasting a single word. She placed her palms against his chest, closed her eyes, and murmured words in an old language that Damien no longer recognized, though he had heard variations of it 23 times before. Minutes passed. The candles flickered. Callum watched from the corner of the room, arms crossed, hope and doubt both written plainly on his face. Finally, Odessa opened her eyes and stepped back. "There is a wound," she said. "Not of the body, of the soul. Something broke inside you long ago, and it has never been allowed to heal properly. I can offer you herbs to dull the sensation, rituals to calm the spirit, but I cannot promise removal, only management." Damien nodded slowly, as though he had expected exactly this answer, because in truth he had. "Management," he repeated. "That is what they all say. Manage it. Live with it. Accept it as part of who I am. I am sorry, my king. Some wounds do not close." "Then you may go," Damien said, his voice flat, exhausted. "Thank you for your honesty, at least. That is more than some of the others gave me." After she left, Callum remained, watching his king sink back into the chair by the window. Outside, the pack territory stretched into darkness, forests and hills that Damien had sworn to protect since the day he took his father's place. He had faced enemy packs, had negotiated treaties, had buried friends who died defending their land, and through all of it, this invisible pain had never once let go of him. "Perhaps you should rest," Callum offered. "Rest," Damien said bitterly. "I have rested for 9 years, and it has not fixed a single thing." Callum hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There is a diner, not far from the border. Human run. I have heard some of the young wolves talk about it. Good food, quiet place. Perhaps a change of scenery would help clear your head, even if it does not heal your chest." Damien almost refused out of habit, but something about the exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders made him want, for just an hour, to be somewhere that was not filled with candles and old healers, and words in dead languages. Somewhere ordinary. "Fine," he said. "Get the car ready. And Callum, tell no one who I am. I do not want questions tonight. I do not want sympathy. I just want to sit somewhere quiet and eat something warm before this pain decides to remind me who is really in charge." Callum nodded and left to arrange it, and Damien stood alone by the window a moment longer, one hand still pressed against his chest, wondering, not for the first time, if this pain would simply be the thing that outlived him. The drive to the diner took less than 20 minutes, though for Damien, every mile felt long. He sat in the back seat with his eyes closed, breathing through the ache the way he had trained himself to do over the years, slow in, slower out, a rhythm that never fully worked but gave him something to hold on to. Callum parked outside a small building lit with warm yellow light, a faded sign reading, Bell River Diner, swinging gently above the door. It was late, the parking lot nearly empty, just a couple of trucks and one old sedan parked near the entrance. "I will wait outside," Callum said. "Take your time." Damien stepped out into the cool night air and allowed himself one slow breath before walking toward the door. A bell chimed softly as he entered, and the smell of coffee and something frying on a grill wrapped around him immediately. Ordinary and comforting in a way he had almost forgotten existed. The diner was small, a dozen booths lining the walls, a counter with stools running along one side, and only a few customers scattered here and there, none of them paying him any attention. He chose a booth near the back, away from the window, and slid into the seat with a quiet groan he could not quite hold back. A moment later, a young woman approached with a notepad in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, an apron tied around her waist, stained faintly with flour and coffee. She looked tired in the way that came from working long hours, but there was something steady in her eyes, something that did not waver, even when she noticed him wince as he adjusted in his seat. "Evening," she said, her voice warm, despite the late hour. "Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" "Coffee," Damien said. "Black." She nodded, scribbled it down, and turned to leave, but paused after only 2 steps. She glanced back at him, studying him for a moment, longer than a stranger usually would. "You all right?" she asked. Damien blinked, caught off guard by the question. Most people who noticed his discomfort either ignored it out of politeness or asked in a way that made it clear they wanted an easy answer, a simple yes, so they could move on with their evening. Her question did not sound like that. It sounded like she actually wanted to know. "I am fine," he said, the automatic answer slipping out before he could stop it. She studied him a second longer, then shrugged lightly. "All right, I will get your coffee." She walked away, and Damien watched her go, something about the exchange lingering in his mind longer than it should have. He shook his head slightly, dismissing it as nothing, just a tired waitress noticing a tired customer, nothing more significant than that. Minutes later she returned with the coffee and set it down gently in front of him, along with a small plate of bread that he had not ordered. "On the house," she said, catching his questioning look. "You look like you have not eaten in a while." "I have not," he admitted, surprised at his own honesty. She gave a small nod, as though that confirmed something she had already suspected, and moved on to check the other tables, leaving Damien alone with his coffee and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being seen by a stranger who owed him nothing and expected nothing in return. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup and allowed himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a moment of stillness. The pain in his chest had not disappeared, it never truly did, but for a few quiet minutes, sitting in a small diner far from his throne and his healers and his endless list of failed cures, it felt just slightly easier to carry. Outside, Callum waited in the car, watching the diner through the window, unaware that inside, something small and unremarkable had just begun, something far more powerful than any of the herbs or rituals or old languages that 24 healers had already tried and failed to make work. The king had come looking for a quiet meal. He had no idea he had just met the one person who would finally understand his pain. Damien returned to the diner 3 nights later, though he told himself it was only because the coffee had been good and the drive helped clear his head before another round of meetings with pack elders. He did not tell Callum the real reason, mostly because he did not fully understand it himself. Something about that quiet exchange with the waitress had stayed with him, small and strange, like a splinter that did not hurt but would not leave either. The diner looked the same as before, warm light spilling onto the gravel outside, the same faded sign creaking gently in the wind. He walked in and took the same booth near the back, and within minutes, the same young woman appeared, notepad in hand, a faint smile on her face as though she recognized him. "Back again," she said. "Coffee, black? You remembered." Damien said, surprised. I remember most regulars, she said, jotting it down. Even the ones who only show up twice. She disappeared toward the kitchen, and Damien found himself studying the room more carefully this time, noticing details he had missed before. A jukebox in the corner, silent for now. A row of photographs behind the counter, faded, showing the diner through different decades. A hand-painted sign near the door that read family-owned since 1962. When she returned with his coffee, she lingered a moment longer than necessary, setting the cup down with care. You are doing that thing again, she said. What thing? Pressing your hand against your chest like you were trying to hold something in. You did it last time too, right before you sat down, and now again just this second. Damien glanced down and realized his hand had indeed drifted to his ribs without him noticing. He pulled it away slowly, unsure how to respond to being caught in such a small, involuntary gesture. It is nothing, he said. It does not look like nothing, she replied, not unkindly. My name is Elena, by the way. Elena Marsh. Since you keep coming back, I figured you should at least know who keeps bringing you your coffee. Damien, he said, offering only his first name, the way he always did, when he did not want questions about titles or packs, or the weight that came with his real position. Well, Damien, I am not trying to pry. It is just something I notice. I have worked here for 6 years, and you learn to read people when you spend that long watching them eat in silence. Some people hold their shoulders tight when they are stressed. Some people tap their fingers. You press your chest, every single time, like there is something in there fighting to get out. Damien said nothing for a long moment, turning his cup slowly on the table, watching the dark liquid ripple. No healer, no elder, no advisor had ever described it quite that way before, as something fighting to get out rather than something broken sitting still. It is an old pain, he said finally, choosing his words carefully. Doctors have looked at it, specialists too. Nobody has found a cause. Elena tilted her head, considering this. Have they asked you when it started? Many times. And what did you tell them? Damien hesitated. The truth was complicated, tangled up in memories he did not like to revisit. Memories of losing his father far too young, of stepping into a role he was not ready for, of promises he made in grief that he had spent every year since trying to keep. He had told the healers vague versions of this story, enough to satisfy their questions without opening the deeper wound underneath. It started around the time I took on a lot of responsibility, he said, which was true, if incomplete. Elena nodded slowly, as though she had expected an answer like that. Sometimes pain is not really about the body, she said. My grandmother used to say that people carry things in their chest that they never let out of their mouth, and eventually the body gets tired of holding it and starts complaining. Maybe your specialists are looking in the wrong place. Damien almost laughed, not out of dismissal, but out of surprise at how simply she had said something that felt, somehow, closer to the truth than anything the 24 trained healers had managed across 9 years. You should have gone into medicine, he said. Elena laughed, a genuine, easy sound. I barely finished community college before my mother got sick, and I had to start working full-time. Medicine was never really on the table for me. I just pay attention, that is all. That is more than most people manage, Damien said quietly. She smiled, pleased by the compliment, then glanced toward the counter, where another customer was waving for a refill. Duty calls, she said. Enjoy your coffee, Damien, and maybe think about what is really sitting in that chest of yours, instead of what the doctors keep telling you it is. She walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, and a coffee that had gone slightly cold. He sat there a long while, turning her words over in his mind, remembering the exact moment his father had died, remembering the promise he had made that night to never let the pack fall, no matter what it cost him personally. He had never told the healers about that promise. He had never told anyone, not even Callum, how heavy it still felt to carry. For the first time in years, he wondered if the wound the healers kept describing was not something mystical at all, but something painfully, plainly human. When he returned to the pack estate that night, Callum noticed a difference in him immediately, though he could not quite name what it was. Good visit? Callum asked as they walked toward the main hall. Strange visit, Damien said. The waitress there, Elena, she said something that has stayed with me. About the pain? About what might be causing it. Damien paused at the top of the stairs, looking out over the dark grounds of the estate, thinking of his father, of the crown he had inherited far too soon, of 9 years spent gripping tightly to a responsibility he had never properly grieved his way into. "What did she say?" Callum asked. Damien was quiet for a long moment. "She said, maybe I am not sick, maybe I am just holding something in that I have never let out." Callum did not answer right away, unsure what to make of such a simple explanation after years of complex diagnoses from powerful healers. But he saw something in his king's face that night that he had not seen in a long time. A flicker of thought, almost hope, however small and uncertain it still was. "Will you go back?" Callum asked. "Yes," Damien said, already knowing the answer before Callum finished the question. "I think I need to." The pack council chamber was tense that morning, voices rising over one another as the elders debated a dispute along the northern border. Damien sat at the head of the long table, trying to focus on maps and territory lines, but his mind kept drifting back to the diner, to Elena's easy voice cutting through years of confusion, with a single simple idea. "My king," said an older wolf named Griffin Ashcombe, one of the longest-serving elders, "the northern pack has ignored our last 3 warnings. If we do not act soon, they will believe we are weak." "We are not weak," Damien said, more sharply than he intended. "We are cautious. There is a difference." Griffin studied him for a moment. The king had always been sharp-minded, but lately, there was something distracted in his manner, as though part of him was elsewhere, even when his body sat at the table. "Are you well, my king? You seem far away today." "I am fine," Damien said, the same automatic answer he gave everyone, though even he was beginning to tire of saying it. The meeting continued for another hour, and by the time it ended, the pain in his chest had flared twice, sharp enough that he had to grip the edge of the table to keep his composure. Callum noticed, as he always did, and said nothing, until the room had emptied. "You should rest before tonight," Callum said. "I have rested enough," Damien replied. "I want to go back to the diner." Callum raised an eyebrow but did not argue. He had learned over the years that once his king set his mind on something, there was little use trying to redirect him. "I will arrange the car." That evening, the diner was busier than before. A small crowd gathered for what appeared to be a birthday celebration in one of the corner booths. Laughter and clinking cups filling the air. Damien found a quieter spot near the window this time, and watched as Elena moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates, refilling cups, offering warm words to regulars who clearly adored her. When she finally reached his table, she looked slightly breathless, but smiled anyway. "Busy night," she said. "Sorry for the wait." "No apology needed," Damien said. "It is good to see the place full." "It is Old Man Cobb's birthday," she said, nodding toward the celebrating group. 92 years old, and he still walks here every week for our pancakes. Some people just do not let go of the things that make them happy." Damien watched the elderly man laughing with his family, surrounded by people who clearly loved him, and something in his chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from something closer to longing. "You are staring," Elena said, amused. "Sorry," Damien said, pulling his attention back. "He looks happy." "He is. His wife passed a few years back, and everyone thought he would fade after that. But he did not. He said something to me once that stuck with me. He said grief only becomes a sickness when you refuse to let it move." Damien's hand drifted toward his chest again, and this time Elena noticed but did not comment on it right away. Instead, she pulled out her notepad and pretended to focus on his order, giving him a moment to collect himself. "What will it be tonight?" she asked. "Coffee again? Or are you finally going to try the food here?" "Surprise me," Damien said. She smiled, wrote something down, and walked away, leaving him once again with his thoughts. He watched the birthday celebration continue, watched the old man's family surround him with warmth, and could not stop thinking about his own father, about the funeral that had happened so quickly, so formally, that he had never truly been allowed to grieve as a son. He had been crowned within days, expected to lead, expected to be strong, and somewhere in that transition, his grief had simply been buried alive inside him. When Elena returned with a plate of food, she set it down and lingered again. "You went quiet," she said. "I was thinking about my father," Damien admitted, surprising himself with how easily the words came out this time. "Was he sick too?" "No. He died suddenly. There was no time to prepare, no time to say the things you are supposed to say before someone leaves. Elena's expression softened, and she slid into the seat across from him without asking, something she had never done before with any customer. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not the version you tell people at official events. The real one." Damien looked at her for a long moment, surprised by the offer, surprised by how much he wanted to accept it. He had spent 9 years surrounded by advisors and healers, who asked about his pain but never once asked about the man he had lost. "He used to take me fishing," Damien said slowly, the memory rising unexpectedly, warm and painful at once. "Every summer, before I was old enough to understand what leadership would eventually ask of me, he would let me sit for hours doing nothing, just watching the water, and he never once rushed me." "That sounds like a good father," Elena said gently. "He was. And then he was gone, and within a week I was expected to sit in his chair and make decisions that affected thousands of lives, and nobody ever asked if I was ready. Nobody ever asked if I had cried enough, or said goodbye enough, or grieved enough. They just needed a leader, and I became one, because that is what was required." Elena listened without interrupting, her eyes steady and warm, and when he finally stopped speaking, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his, just for a moment. "You buried him quickly," she said quietly, "but I do not think you ever finished grieving him." Damien sat frozen, her words landing somewhere deep and unguarded, somewhere no healer had ever managed to reach despite years of rituals and herbs and ancient languages. "I do not know how to grieve someone properly 9 years later," he admitted. "Maybe you start by admitting it still hurts," Elena said. "That is usually the hardest part. Everything after that gets a little easier." She withdrew her hand slowly, aware perhaps that she had crossed a line most waitresses would never cross with a customer, but Damien did not mind. If anything, he wanted her to stay longer, to keep speaking in that plain, honest way that cut through 9 years of confusion like nothing else had. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For asking about him instead of just asking about the pain." Elena smiled softly, rose from the booth, and returned to her other tables, leaving Damien alone with his food, his thoughts, and for the first time in a very long while, a small, fragile sense that he was finally getting closer to something real. Days passed, and Damien found himself thinking about the diner more than he thought about the council meetings, more than he thought about the border disputes, more even than he thought about the pain itself, which had, strangely, felt slightly less sharp since his last conversation with Elena. He mentioned this to Callum one afternoon as they walked the training grounds together, watching young wolves practice their forms under the midday sun. "It has not disappeared," Damien said, "but it does not grip me the same way it used to. Not since I started talking to her." Callum considered this carefully. Perhaps there is something to what she said. Perhaps the healers were treating a wound that was never physical to begin with. 24 of them, Damien said, shaking his head. 24 trained healers, and none of them thought to ask me about my father. They were looking for curses and blockages, Callum said. She was looking at you. Damien nodded slowly, struck by how simple yet accurate that distinction was. The healers had approached him as a puzzle to be solved through ritual and diagnosis, while Elena had approached him simply as a person, tired and hurting, deserving of an honest conversation rather than a magical fix. That evening, he returned to the diner once more, and this time, Elena greeted him with familiarity that had grown comfortable between them. "You are becoming one of my regulars," she said, setting down his coffee without needing to ask what he wanted. "Is that a bad thing?" "Not at all. Regulars are the best part of this job. You get to watch people's lives unfold in small pieces, over cups of coffee and plates of eggs." She sat across from him again, since the evening was slow and few customers required her attention. "So, did you think about what I said?" "I have thought about little else," Damien admitted. And I think you are right. I think I have spent 9 years treating grief like an enemy to defeat, instead of something to simply feel." Elena smiled, pleased but not surprised. "It usually takes people a while to admit that. You are ahead of most." "I have had excellent guidance," Damien said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something close to lightness in his chest. Not an absence of pain exactly, but a loosening, as though a fist that had been clenched for 9 years had finally begun, slowly, to open. They talked for nearly an hour that night, about small things at first, about the diner's history, about Elena's mother who had passed several years earlier after a long illness, about the community college dreams she had set aside to support her family. Damien found himself sharing more than he intended as well, careful still to avoid mentioning his true position, but honest about the weight of responsibility, about the isolation of leadership, about how difficult it was to be surrounded by people, yet feel completely unseen. "You know," Elena said at one point, "most people who carry that much weight end up either hardening completely or breaking apart. You have not done either. That says something about you." "I nearly broke apart plenty of times," Damien said quietly. "The pain in my chest was proof of that, even if nobody understood what it meant." "Pain is not always the enemy," Elena said. "Sometimes, it is just the body's way of asking to be listened to." Damien looked at her for a long moment, struck again by how simply she expressed ideas that felt, to him, like revelations. "Where did you learn to think this way?" he asked. Elena laughed softly. "I told you already. Life. Watching people. My grandmother used to say, 'The body keeps score of everything the heart refuses to say out loud.' I did not fully understand what she meant, until I watched my mother get sick from stress she never let herself express. By the time she finally spoke about her fears, her worries, everything she had been carrying silently for years, it was almost too late." "I am sorry," Damien said. "It taught me something valuable, though," Elena said. "It taught me to notice when people are carrying something they have not said out loud. You have been carrying something for 9 years, Damien. I do not know everything about your life, but I know that much." Damien sat quietly for a moment, absorbing her words, feeling the truth of them settle into him more deeply than any diagnosis had before. He thought of his father again, of the fishing trips, of the sudden funeral, of the crown placed on his head before his tears had even properly dried. "I never said goodbye to him properly," Damien said quietly. "There was no time. There was only duty." "Maybe it is not too late," Elena said gently. "Grief does not follow a schedule. You can still say goodbye, even years later, even if it feels strange to do so." Her words settled over him like something warm and necessary, something no ritual or ancient herb had ever managed to provide. He left the diner that night with his chest feeling lighter than it had in years, not healed completely, but shifting, moving, finally beginning to loosen after 9 long years of silence. Outside, Callum waited as usual, and when Damien climbed into the car, his beta studied his face carefully. "You look different," Callum said. "I feel different," Damien admitted. "I think I finally understand what has been wrong with me all this time." "And what is that?" Damien looked out the window at the diner's warm glow fading behind them as the car pulled away. "I think I have been grieving my father for 9 years without ever allowing myself to actually grieve him. I think that is the wound none of the healers could find, because it was never meant for a healer to find. It was meant for me to face on my own." Word began to spread quietly among the pack that their king had changed in some subtle way. He listened more carefully during meetings, allowed himself moments of stillness that had been absent for years, and though the pain still occasionally flared, it no longer controlled him the way it once had. Callum noticed it most of all, watching his king move through his duties with a steadiness that had been missing since the early days of his rule. One evening, Griffin Ashcombe approached Damien after a council session, his expression thoughtful. "You seem lighter these days, my king. Whatever has changed, I hope it continues." "I have been talking to someone," Damien said simply, unwilling to explain further, though the elder did not press for details. "Whoever they are," Griffin said, "they have done more for you than 24 healers combined." Damien smiled faintly, thinking of Elena, of her plain honesty, of the way she had cut through 9 years of confusion, with nothing more than careful attention and simple questions. He returned to the diner that night, as he had nearly every few days over the past weeks, and found her wiping down the counter, as the last customers trickled out into the night. "Slow night," she said, glancing up as the bell above the door chimed his arrival. "Perfect timing, actually. I could use the company." He took his usual booth, and she joined him shortly after, bringing 2 cups of tea instead of coffee, explaining that it was better for the evening hours. "I have been thinking about what you said," Damien told her, "about saying goodbye, even years later. And I want to do it." I do not know exactly how, but I want to try. Elena's expression softened with genuine warmth. That is a big step. What does your instinct tell you would help? Damien considered the question carefully. There was a place my father used to take me, a lake, north of here, where we used to fish together every summer, before everything changed. I have not been back since he died. I think, perhaps, I have been avoiding it. Maybe it is time to stop avoiding it, Elena said gently. Would you come with me? Damien asked, the question surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Elena blinked, clearly not expecting the invitation, but after a moment of consideration, she nodded slowly. I do not usually get involved in customers' personal lives like this, but you are not really just a customer anymore, are you? No, Damien admitted. I do not think I am. They arranged to meet that weekend, Elena taking a rare day off from the diner, and Damien arriving in a plain vehicle, without his usual guards, wanting this particular outing to remain simple, private, unburdened by the trappings of his position. The lake, when they arrived, was exactly as he remembered it, still and quiet, surrounded by tall pines that swayed gently in the morning breeze. It is beautiful here, Elena said, stepping out of the car and taking in the scenery. He loved it, Damien said quietly, walking toward the water's edge. He said it was the only place where nobody needed anything from him, no decisions, no disputes, just water and patience. Elena walked beside him in comfortable silence, allowing him the space to feel whatever needed to surface, without pressing him for words. They sat together near the shore, and for a long while, neither of them spoke, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the rocks. I never got to say goodbye, Damien finally said, his voice quieter than Elena had ever heard it. He died so suddenly. One day he was teaching me how to tie a proper fishing knot, and the next day, he was gone. There was no time to prepare, no time to tell him everything I wanted him to know. What would you have told him? Elena asked softly. Damien's throat tightened, but he pushed through it, the words coming slowly at first, then faster, as though a dam long held closed had finally begun to crack. I would have told him I was scared, scared of taking his place, scared of failing everyone who depended on me, scared of not being even half the leader he was. I would have told him I missed him every single day, that I still catch myself wanting to ask his advice before making difficult decisions, that a part of me has been waiting 9 years for him to walk through the door and tell me I have been doing all right. Tears slipped down his face, unfamiliar and unstoppable. 9 years of suppressed grief, finally finding release, in the quiet company of someone who had done nothing but listen without judgment. Elena did not reach for him, did not try to comfort him with words, simply sat beside him, and let him feel everything he had been avoiding for far too long. When he finally quieted, his breathing steadier, his chest feeling strangely lighter despite the tears still drying on his face, Elena spoke gently. How does it feel? Damien considered the question honestly. Lighter, he said, like something has finally been allowed to leave. That is what happens, Elena said, when we stop holding grief hostage and let it simply exist the way it needs to. They sat by the lake for another hour, talking now about lighter things, about Elena's own memories of her mother, about small moments of joy that existed alongside the sorrow of loss. By the time they returned to the car, Damien felt different in a way he could not fully articulate, as though 9 years of silent suffering had finally begun, truly and properly, to heal. In the weeks that followed the visit to the lake, Damien noticed a change in himself that felt almost unbelievable after 9 years of relentless pain. The tightness in his chest, once a constant companion, had softened into something manageable, something that no longer dictated the rhythm of his days. He still felt occasional twinges, especially during moments of high stress, but they no longer consumed him the way they once had. Callum noticed the difference most clearly during a particularly tense negotiation with a neighboring pack, where Damien handled the discussion with a calm clarity that had been absent for years. You handled that beautifully, Callum said afterward, as they walked back toward the estate. I feel more like myself than I have in a long time, Damien admitted. It is her, is it not? The waitress. Damien did not bother denying it. Elena has done something no healer managed in 9 years. She did not try to fix me. She simply helped me see what I had been avoiding. Perhaps you should tell her who you really are, Callum suggested carefully. It seems unfair to continue hiding such an important part of yourself from someone who has helped you this much. Damien had considered this himself many times over the past weeks, wrestling with how Elena might react upon learning that the quiet, tired customer she had been speaking with was, in fact, the alpha king of the Ashgrove pack. Would she feel deceived? Would the easy honesty between them shift into something more guarded, more careful, now that titles and power entered the equation? That evening, he returned to the diner with the intention of finally telling her the truth. She greeted him as always, warm and familiar, sliding into the booth across from him once her other tables had quieted. "You look nervous," she observed immediately, her sharp eyes catching what most people missed. "I have something I need to tell you," Damien said, his voice steady despite the unfamiliar nervousness twisting through him. "All right," Elena said, folding her hands on the table, giving him her full attention. "My name is not simply Damien," he began carefully. "I am Damien Ashgrove, Alpha King of the Ashgrove Pack. I have hidden this from you these past weeks, not out of dishonesty toward you specifically, but out of habit, wanting to be seen as simply a person rather than a position." Elena's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession, surprise first, followed by something more thoughtful, and finally settling into calm understanding. "I suspected there was more to you than you let on," she said slowly. "The way you carried yourself, the careful way you avoided certain questions. But I did not expect an Alpha King." "Are you upset?" Damien asked, watching her carefully. Elena considered the question honestly before answering. "A little, perhaps, that you did not trust me sooner. But I understand why you might have hesitated. People change how they treat you once they know who you are. I imagine that has happened to you before." "More times than I can count," Damien admitted. "Well," Elena said, a small smile returning to her face, "I do not treat kings any differently than tired travelers who need a good cup of coffee and someone willing to listen, so nothing changes on my end." Relief washed over Damien, warm and unexpected. He had feared, more than he realized, that revealing his true identity would create distance between them, would transform their easy conversations into something stiff and formal. Instead, Elena's steady acceptance only deepened the connection that had been growing quietly over the past weeks. 24 healers tried for 9 years to solve whatever was wrong with me," Damien said. "None of them came close to what you managed in a single conversation." "I did not solve anything," Elena said modestly. "I just asked the right questions and listened to the answers. Sometimes that is all people actually need." "It was enough," Damien said. "More than enough." They talked late into the evening, the diner emptying around them until only the two of them remained, the conversation flowing easily between lighter subjects and deeper reflections. Damien found himself sharing details of his rule that he had never spoken of to anyone outside his closest advisors, and Elena listened with the same steady attention she had offered from their very first meeting, unimpressed by his title, genuinely interested only in the person sitting across from her. As the night wound down and Damien prepared to leave, Elena walked him to the door, the late hour casting a quiet stillness over the diner. "Thank you," Damien said, "for everything, for seeing me as a person rather than a title, and for helping me finally understand what 9 years of pain was actually trying to tell me." "Thank you for trusting me with the truth," Elena replied. "Both truths, actually. The one about your name, and the one about your grief." Damien smiled, something warm and genuine spreading through his chest, where pain had lived for so long. "I would like to continue this," he said carefully. "Not just the visits to the diner, but whatever this has become between us." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the complexity of what he was suggesting, the vast difference between their worlds, the challenges that would inevitably arise from a king and a waitress choosing to build something together. "I would like that too," she said finally, "complicated as it might be." "Nothing worth having is ever simple," Damien said. Elena laughed softly, the sound settling into the quiet diner like something warm and hopeful. "No," she agreed. "I suppose it never is." News of the king's improved health spread quickly through the pack, though most assumed it was the result of some new treatment from a distant healer, rather than a simple waitress from a border town diner. Damien allowed the assumption to stand for a while, unsure how the pack elders would react to the truth, uncertain whether they would understand a bond built on plain conversation rather than ritual or magic. Griffin Ashcombe, ever perceptive, cornered Callum one afternoon in the training yard, his curiosity evident. "The king seems truly well for the first time in years," Griffin said. "What healer finally succeeded where 24 others failed?" Callum hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It was not exactly a healer," he said carefully. Griffin raised an eyebrow, waiting for further explanation, but Callum offered none, leaving the elder to draw his own conclusions. Word eventually reached the council that the king had been spending considerable time at a human diner near the border, and speculation began to circulate, some elders assuming political motives, others assuming simple curiosity, none suspecting the deeper truth. Damien decided it was time to address the matter directly, rather than allow rumors to shape the narrative. He called a private meeting with his closest advisors, including Griffin and Callum, and explained plainly what had transpired over the past several weeks. "Her name is Elena Marsh," Damien said, "a human woman working at a diner near the border. She noticed something about my condition that none of our healers ever considered, and through simple conversation, she helped me understand and begin healing from a grief I had carried silently since my father's death." The room fell quiet, the elders absorbing this information with varying degrees of surprise. Griffin, ever practical, was the first to speak. "A human woman succeeded where 24 trained healers failed?" "She did not use magic," Damien said. "She used honesty and attention. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not mystical at all. Sometimes they are simply human, and require a human touch to heal properly." "And what is your intention toward her?" another elder asked carefully. Damien considered his answer, aware of the significance of what he was about to say. "I intend to continue building whatever this connection has become. She has done more for my well-being than any ritual or potion, and I will not dismiss that simply because it does not fit traditional expectations of how a king should find healing." The elders exchanged glances, some skeptical, others cautiously supportive, but none openly opposed the king's decision. Griffin, in particular, seemed thoughtful rather than resistant. "If she has truly healed what 9 years of tradition could not," Griffin said slowly, "then perhaps tradition has been looking in the wrong direction all along." Relieved by the council's measured response, Damien returned to the diner that evening feeling lighter than he had in years, both from the healing progress with his grief and from the growing acceptance of his connection with Elena among his closest advisors. He found her finishing her shift, untying her apron as the last customers departed into the evening darkness. "You look pleased about something," Elena observed, noticing the ease in his posture. "I told my council about you," Damien said, "about everything that has happened these past weeks." Elena paused, clearly surprised. "And how did that go?" "Better than I expected," he said. "There was hesitation, certainly, but no outright opposition. I believe, in time, they will come to understand what I already know." "And what is that?" Elena asked, curious. "That healing does not always come from where we expect it to," Damien said. "Sometimes it comes from a quiet diner near the border, and a waitress with sharp eyes and an honest heart." Elena smiled, setting her apron aside and joining him at the counter. "I never imagined my life taking this particular turn," she admitted. 6 years of serving coffee and pancakes, and then an alpha king walks through my door, carrying 9 years of unspoken grief." "Do you regret it?" Damien asked. "Not for a moment," Elena said firmly. "Watching you heal, watching you become lighter with each visit, has been one of the most meaningful things I have experienced in a long time. I do not need magic or titles to find that meaningful. I just need to know it mattered." "It mattered more than you know," Damien said. They talked for a while longer, discussing the practical challenges that lay ahead. The complexities of a king building a relationship with a human woman from outside pack society. The adjustments that would inevitably be required from both of their worlds. Neither of them pretended the path forward would be simple, but both agreed it was a path worth walking. As Damien prepared to leave that evening, he paused at the door and turned back to look at Elena, still standing behind the counter, illuminated by the diner's warm yellow light. 24 healers tried for 9 years, he said quietly, and none of them came close to what you managed in a matter of weeks. I did not do anything extraordinary, Elena said modestly. You listened, Damien said. You paid attention. In a world full of rituals and complicated cures, sometimes the simplest things are the ones that actually heal us. Elena smiled softly as he stepped out into the night, and for the first time in 9 long years, Damien Ashgrove walked away from that diner, feeling not just lighter, but whole. Not everyone within the pack welcomed the news of the king's growing bond with a human woman as easily as Griffin and the council had. Word eventually spread beyond the estate walls, reaching ears less inclined toward acceptance, including a distant cousin of Damien's named Victor Ashgrove, who had long harbored quiet ambitions of his own regarding the throne. Victor had never openly challenged Damien's rule, understanding the strength and loyalty the king commanded among the pack, but the news of a human woman influencing the king's decisions struck him as an opportunity worth exploring. He began quietly gathering allies among elders who valued tradition strictly, suggesting that a king so easily swayed by outside influence might not be fit to maintain the pack's ancient customs. Callum caught wind of these murmurs first, bringing the concern directly to Damien during a private conversation in the estate library. Victor has been speaking with several of the more traditional elders, Callum said carefully. He suggests your judgment has been compromised. Damien's expression hardened slightly, though the reaction lacked the sharp edge of pain that once accompanied his stress. Compromised how? He argues that a king healed by human influence rather than pack tradition may no longer represent pack values as strongly as required. It is a subtle argument, but dangerous if it gains enough support. Damien considered this carefully, aware that Victor's ambitions were not new, merely finding a fresh angle to exploit. Let him speak, Damien said finally. I will not hide who has helped me, nor will I apologize for finding healing outside old traditions that failed me for 9 years. He may push harder than expected, Callum warned. Then I will meet that challenge directly, Damien said. I have spent 9 years being weakened by silence and unspoken grief. I will not allow fear of gossip to silence me, now that I have finally found relief. True to Callum's warning, Victor requested a formal council session days later, presenting his concerns openly before the assembled elders. He spoke carefully, avoiding direct accusations, instead framing his argument around tradition and the importance of maintaining pack customs during uncertain times. I do not question the king's improved health, Victor said smoothly. Only the source of it. A human woman, however well-intentioned, cannot understand the deeper responsibilities of pack leadership. If the king's judgment continues to be shaped by outside influence, how can we trust decisions regarding territory, alliances, and pack law? Several elders murmured among themselves, some nodding in cautious agreement, others clearly skeptical of Victor's underlying motives. Griffin, who had grown to respect the change in Damien over recent weeks, rose to address the council directly. I have served this pack for over 30 years, Griffin said firmly. I watched our king suffer for 9 of those years, weakened by pain that 24 trained healers could not resolve. In a matter of weeks, through honest conversation and genuine care, he has become stronger, clearer, and more capable than I have seen him in years. If tradition failed us for 9 years while a simple human conversation succeeded, perhaps it is tradition that requires reconsideration, not the king's judgment. The council fell into thoughtful silence, weighing Griffin's words against Victor's careful insinuations. Damien, sensing the moment required his direct voice rather than allowing others to defend him, rose from his seat. I understand the concern regarding tradition, Damien said calmly, but I ask this council to consider what tradition actually serves. Is it meant to protect rigid customs regardless of their effectiveness, or is it meant to protect the strength and well-being of this pack and its leader? I have led this pack for 11 years, 9 of which I spent silently suffering because tradition offered no solution beyond rituals and herbs that never once addressed the actual wound. I will not dismiss the person who finally helped me heal, simply because her methods fall outside expected customs. Victor attempted a final rebuttal, but the mood of the council had clearly shifted, swayed by Damien's calm conviction and Griffin's steadfast support. The session ended without any formal action against the king. Victor's ambitions temporarily stalled, though Damien understood this would not be the last challenge regarding Elena's place in his life. That evening, he shared the details of the council session with Elena, unwilling to keep the political complications hidden from her now that their bond had deepened considerably. I am sorry you have to face this because of me, Elena said, concern evident in her voice. You have nothing to apologize for, Damien said firmly. You did not create Victor's ambitions. You simply helped me heal, and that healing threatens people who benefit from my weakness. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we continue, Damien said, carefully, but without hiding. I will not return to 9 years of silent suffering, simply to satisfy those who fear change. Elena reached across the counter and took his hand gently, her steady presence offering the same quiet strength that had guided him through the darkest moments of his grief. Whatever challenges come, she said, we will face them honestly, the same way we have handled everything else between us. Damien squeezed her hand gently, grateful beyond words for a connection that had not only healed 9 years of hidden pain, but had also given him the strength to face challenges to his throne, with a clarity and confidence he had not possessed in a very long time. Victor did not give up easily. In the weeks following the council session, he continued gathering support quietly, using every opportunity to plant doubt about the king's judgment among elders who valued strict tradition. He avoided direct confrontation, understanding that Griffin and several other respected elders now stood firmly behind Damien, but he waited patiently for a moment of weakness to exploit. That moment arrived unexpectedly, during a tense negotiation, with a rival pack over disputed hunting grounds along the eastern border. The negotiations had stretched over several days, tempers flaring on both sides, and during a particularly heated exchange, Damien felt a familiar tightness return to his chest, sharper than it had been in weeks. He excused himself briefly, stepping outside the negotiation hall to steady his breathing, unaware that Victor had been watching closely, waiting exactly for a moment like this. The king's weakness returns, Victor murmured to a nearby elder, loud enough for others to overhear. Perhaps his healing was never as complete as we were led to believe. Word of this moment spread quickly, and by the time Damien returned to the negotiations, having recovered his composure, whispers had already begun circulating about a possible relapse. Callum, sensing the danger, informed Damien of the situation immediately after the negotiations concluded successfully, despite the earlier tension. Victor is using this against you, Callum warned. He suggests your recovery was temporary, perhaps even illusory. Damien considered this carefully, recognizing the danger in allowing a single moment of stress to be twisted into evidence against his overall progress. Rather than hiding from the situation, he decided to address it directly, calling another council session to speak plainly about what had actually happened. Yes, I experienced discomfort during the negotiations, Damien admitted before the assembled elders. Healing from 9 years of unspoken grief does not happen instantly, nor does it mean I will never again feel stress or tension. What has changed is not the complete absence of difficulty, but my ability to face it without being consumed by it. I recovered within minutes and completed the negotiations successfully. That is proof of progress, not evidence of failure. Griffin nodded in firm agreement. No healing, whether from tradition or otherwise, promises perfection. It promises improvement, resilience, and the ability to continue functioning despite difficulty. Our king has demonstrated exactly that. Victor, sensing his argument losing ground once again, shifted his approach, questioning instead whether continued involvement with Elena might pose ongoing complications for pack stability, subtly suggesting that perhaps distance from her would serve the king better long-term. Damien addressed this directly as well, his voice steady and certain. Elena has not caused instability. She has provided the clarity and honesty that allowed me to finally address a wound 9 years in the making. Whatever discomfort remains is part of ongoing healing, not evidence that her influence has failed. The council listened carefully, and this time, even elders who had previously sided cautiously with Victor found themselves persuaded by Damien's calm, reasoned defense. Victor's influence weakened further, his ambitions once again stalled by his cousin's steady resolve. That evening, Damien returned to the diner, sharing the details of the council session with Elena, as he had grown accustomed to doing. I am sorry this keeps happening because of me, Elena said again, though her voice carried less worry this time, having witnessed Damien handle the previous challenge successfully. Do not apologize, Damien said firmly. Every challenge Victor raises only strengthens my resolve to continue this path, both regarding my healing and regarding you. 9 years of silence taught me nothing except how to suffer quietly. These past months have taught me the value of speaking honestly, even when it invites difficulty. Elena smiled, reaching for his hand across the counter. You have grown so much since that first night you walked through my door, pressing your hand against your chest, trying so hard to hide how much pain you carried. I could not have grown without you, Damien said sincerely. 24 healers spent 9 years trying to fix something they never properly understood. You understood it within minutes, simply by paying attention and asking honest questions. Sometimes healing does not require magic, Elena said softly. Sometimes it just requires someone willing to truly listen. Damien squeezed her hand gently, grateful once again for the unexpected connection that had transformed not only his physical well-being, but his entire understanding of what healing actually meant. Despite Victor's ongoing attempts to undermine their bond, Damien felt more certain than ever that Elena's place in his life was not a weakness to be exploited, but the very source of his newfound strength. Months passed, and the pain that had once controlled 9 years of Damien's life faded into something that no longer defined him. He still carried the memory of his father, still felt occasional pangs of grief during quiet moments, but the crushing weight that had followed him for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a steady sense of peace he had once believed impossible to achieve. Victor's ambitions eventually dissolved entirely, unable to gain sufficient support against a king who had proven, time and again, both his emotional resilience and his continued capability as a leader. Griffin remained one of Damien's most trusted advisors, often remarking privately how the pack's greatest healing had come not from ancient rituals, but from a simple human diner near the border. Damien requested a formal gathering of the full council one final time, wanting to properly acknowledge the person who had changed the course of his life so completely. Elena attended nervously, unfamiliar with the formality of pack proceedings, though Damien remained close beside her throughout the ceremony, offering quiet reassurance. Standing before the assembled elders, advisors and pack members who had gathered for the occasion, Damien spoke with the same calm conviction that had guided him through Victor's challenges months earlier. For 9 years, this pack watched me suffer through pain that 24 trained healers could not resolve, Damien said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. We tried rituals, herbs, ancient languages, and countless diagnoses, all without success. It took a single conversation with an ordinary woman, someone with no magical training, no formal medical education, simply the willingness to pay attention and ask honest questions, to finally help me understand and heal a wound that had nothing to do with curses or blockages, and everything to do with unspoken grief. He turned to look at Elena, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of pride and quiet emotion. Elena Marsh solved in a matter of weeks what 24 healers could not solve in 9 years. She did not use magic. She used honesty, patience, and genuine care. I believe this pack owes her not only gratitude, but recognition of the value found beyond our traditional methods of healing. The hall erupted into applause, elders and pack members alike acknowledging the truth of what their king had said, understanding now, more clearly than ever, how deeply his suffering had once run, and how completely he had healed since Elena's arrival in his life. Griffin approached afterward, offering Elena a respectful bow that surprised her with its formality. You have done something remarkable, he said sincerely. This pack is grateful, and I suspect our king is more grateful still. Elena smiled, glancing toward Damien, who watched her with open affection that no longer needed to be hidden or explained. I only listened, she said modestly, the same humble response she had offered many times before. Sometimes listening is the rarest and most powerful gift anyone can offer, Griffin replied. Later that evening, after the formal gathering had concluded and the hall had emptied, Damien and Elena walked together along the estate grounds, the same grounds he had once paced alone, gripping his chest against pain that no one seemed able to explain. Do you regret any of this? Damien asked quietly. The complications, the political challenges, the unfamiliar world you have stepped into? Elena considered the question honestly before answering. Not for a single moment. 6 years of serving coffee at a small diner, and then one tired stranger walked through the door, carrying 9 years of hidden grief. I never imagined that stranger would turn out to be an alpha king, nor did I imagine how much meaning I would find in helping him heal. Damien stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his chest finally free of the pain that had haunted him for nearly a decade. 24 healers tried for years to fix what was broken inside me, he said softly. But it was you, an ordinary waitress with an extraordinary heart, who finally understood what I truly needed. Not magic, not ritual, just honesty, patience, and someone willing to truly see me. Elena reached up and gently placed her hand against his chest, exactly where the pain had once lived so persistently. "How does it feel now?" she asked. Damien covered her hand with his own, feeling nothing but warmth and steady peace where suffering had once resided for far too long. "It feels whole," he said. "For the first time in 9 years, it finally feels whole." Together, they continued walking beneath the quiet evening sky, the Alpha King and the waitress who had healed him, their bond now firmly woven into the story of a pack that had learned, through their unlikely connection, that sometimes the deepest wounds require nothing more than honest conversation and a heart willing to truly listen.